Well, hi and welcome. Thanks for being on time. It's me, Ethan, college essay guy, and I'm gonna do a little thing here. I'm gonna wait actually like 1 minute just to make sure because sometimes folks show up. I don't want to really penalize. Well, I mean they're late, but let's give them just 1 more minute. The check-in question, if you just joined us, is what are you present to right now? We've got agriculture, math homework. Has the webinar started? It is, Ingrid, welcome. Let's see, AP Studio Art homework. What else are you present to? I'm curious to know. Sup, Kay? Good to have you. Recovering from COVID. Glad to hear you're recovering, Susie. I'm sorry, that sounds hard. So we've got Ashley standing by, who, she is in the chat room as well. If you've got any tech issues, a lot of times if you're not hearing me or seeing me, you can just refresh, and that usually takes care of things. Because folks will ask, yes, I'll send out the recording of this, and I hope this is useful. I'm glad you're here. I know it's a tense time for some of us. It's kind of a weird liminal space, which is a great word to know, by the way. It's a great college word. And I'm glad that you're spending a few minutes with me. So let me just do a quick recap of what I'm going to cover on this session. So as promised, these are 15 ways to uplevel your essays right now. I'm going to cover 5 ways to start your college essay if you're working on one right now. I've reordered these from the email that I sent out. Then next, I'm going to do 2 ways after that to improve the flow of your personal statement. Let's say you've figured out the structure, but it's not quite flowing. I'll talk to you about that. And then how do you know if your personal statement's doing its job, and what actually is the job of the personal statement? Then I'll do 3 tips on 3 of the most common supplemental essays. I'll talk to you about how to save a bunch of time during the application process. I'm going to go through an awesome application, one of my favorites from last year, and then I'll do a quick PSA for my upcoming courses. If you've got questions, you can throw them here in the chat box. And the very awesome Ashley will put your name and your question in here. And I'm hopefully going to have like 20 minutes for Q&A. I'm going to try to get through this content so that we can do lots of Q&A time. So switching my screen, I'm in a really good mood right now. I just want you all to know that. That's what I'm sharing. That's what I'm present to. All right. So here are 15 ways to level up your essays right now. If you've never met me before, here are some quick facts that qualify me for being here, I suppose. I went to college myself. I got an MFA, which doesn't qualify me for being here, but I guess it qualifies me for speaking and stuff because I got an MFA in acting. A couple counseling certificates. Since 2003, this is what basically I've spent most of my time doing and thinking about. This is what I've got my 10,000 hours in. And I share a lot of resources through my website. I found out yesterday that in October, we had 1 million sessions on the website, which is kind of cool. And I'm a former missionary kid, fun fact, which means that I spent a lot of time being the new kid. I went to 13 different schools, grew up in Spain, Ecuador, and Colombia. Y hablo español. But I will not be delivering this session in español. Let's just do a quick look at what is this whole application process. So here's the mapping process as I see it. So you've got you, and you've got all these different moments, experiences, essences, images from your life. And the challenge of this application process is how do you take you and squeeze it into these gray boxes of the college application? Now hopefully they're not gray by the time you're done, but what are these boxes? Well, you've got your main personal statement, and it's the biggest because, hey, I'm a college essay guy. No, because I think it's going to take you the longest to work on this, usually in the process. But then you've got your activities list, your additional information section, and all these other things, right? And today I'm going to be talking mostly about main personal statement and supplemental essays. But you've got all these other things that matter as well. And so when it comes to your application, the challenge is how do you fit all these things into that? Well, I think it's good to do what I call a preliminary sort, which is to say do great brainstorming to try and figure out what is all my stuff that I want to share with colleges. And then how do we sort it into what goes in the personal statement? What goes in the activities list? What goes in supplemental essays? I call that a preliminary sort because it could be that those things change later on. After you've done a preliminary sort, then, here are the pieces you need to look at. The activities list, additional info, and the why us. The extracurricular essay, which is often a separate one, supplemental essay that some schools require, but not all. And then there are some more specific supplemental essays. And then some schools have short answer questions, or they every once in a while have a video, but not too many. And once you've worked through all those pieces, then it's time to make sure the application is actually doing its job. And I'll talk to you more about that at the end of the webinar. Until you finally end up with this beautiful application that looks like this. All of your gray boxes have become brightly, beautifully colored, and you're good to go, right? That's the goal. So let's start with the main personal statement. I'm going to switch my screen from one screen to another. I'm not sure what accent that is. I think it's British. Okay. So here are some ways to start your college essay. And I made a little note in the email that I sent you that when you shouldn't worry about it too much. I don't think you should worry too much about your essay when you're trying to figure out what your topic is. What I mean by this is like the first thing to figure out is like, is this a topic that's really going to work? And what do I mean by work? Like, I think a great topic is stretchy enough, I like to say elastic, to connect to different sides of you. And second, is it somewhat uncommon, or are you doing somewhat uncommon things with it? Now, if you spend too much time obsessing over an opening, and then you end up finding that the middle of your essay isn't great, or the topic isn't awesome, then you've spent all this time that you shouldn't necessarily, that you didn't necessarily need to spend on the opening. So I think a great time to think about your opening is a little bit later in the process. So this is my Choose Your Own Adventure essay tool. This is part of the Pay What You Can course that I'll tell you about at the end. Montage structure. I'm going to hop into Montage here. Montage is basically writing an essay that's based on lots of different parts of who you are and finding a connective theme or thread. And I think just to kind of walk you through the process, I think it's important to brainstorm, do great brainstorming, choose a path. I believe there are, from what I've found over the last 15 years, that there are a variety of different paths that you can choose for your personal statement. Here are some of them. And once you've sort of figured out a path and you've also brainstormed other possible topics, then once you get into the writing of it, I think it's a good idea to write your first draft and then start thinking about your openings. So here's some ways to open. First, actually, let's start with bad ideas for openings. So I wouldn't recommend starting, for example, with an overly grand, ambiguous statement like, many great thinkers have existed in our nation's history, or the key to a successful endeavor is perseverance. Oftentimes, a reader is reading and they read a sentence like that and they just kind of go into like, when the computer goes into sleep mode, they just kind of go, And you want to get in, my friend Brad says, you want to get into, I don't know if he made up this term or whatever, but into accepting mode. In other words, the reader reads it and they're like, I'm excited about this writer. I'm excited about their opening. Oftentimes, an overly grand, ambiguous statement is going to not do that. Another mistake that I see students make is they try and go meta with like, I stare at the black screen, or it's 3 hours until I'm supposed to turn in this essay. And that usually is like bad, 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 and then amazing. So a very small number of students can do this in an amazing way, but I think that it's actually a pretty common approach. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it unless you've got the time and the energy and the skills that's skills with a Z, to make it amazing. The quotation essay is another one that's pretty common. In the words of MLK or Gandhi, we want to hear your words. So if you've got a perfect quotation, I would save it. Give us your story, whatever that is. And if you want to put in a quotation, maybe you put it at the ending, but chances are, if you've done a great job telling your story, you won't need that quotation from somebody else to bring legitimacy or context to it, because you're going to be able to provide that context for yourself. And then sometimes I've seen students basically give the too obvious thesis that spoils the ending of the movie, which is basically saying, this is an essay about why I want to be a doctor. And it's taught me, discipline, my experiences have taught me discipline, hard work, and perseverance. And it's like, well, that's the whole story. Well, I don't even need to read the essay now. So you want to pique our interest, not give the whole thing away. What are some ways to do that? Here's 7. I'm going to go over 5. So first is what my younger brother Nick calls the Hemingway, which is an image-based description that's pretty short, that gives us something that kind of draws our attention, and then gives us something to give a little more context. So for example, every Saturday morning I'd awaken to the smell of crushed garlic and piquant pepper. I'd stumble into the kitchen to find my grandmother squatting over a large silver bowl, mixing fat lips of fresh cabbages with garlic, salt, and red pepper. Notice how those specifics are kind of awakening our senses. That was how the delectable Korean dish kimchi was born every weekend at my home. So notice the context there. It comes in right after that. So I also love that this opening is hinting at core values. I think core values are such a big part of the college application process. And here we see culture, ritual, family, things that are important to the student. They're going to be important in this personal statement. Without giving too much about where this is headed, I'm kind of intrigued. Okay, well, why are you starting with kimchi? Where is this going? The twist is another option. And basically you had us one way and then you take us another direction. So growing up, my world was basketball. My summers were spent between the two solid black lines. My skin was consistently tan in splotches and ridden with random scratches. My wardrobe consisted mainly of track shorts, Nike shoes, and tournament t-shirts. Gatorade and Fun Dip were my pregame snacks. The cacophony of rowdy crowds, ref whistles, squeaky shoes, and scoreboard buzzers was a familiar sound. I was the team captain of almost every team I played on, familiar with the X's and O's of plays, commander of the court, and the coach's right-hand girl. But that was only me on the surface. Deep down, I was an East Asian influenced bibliophile and a young adult fiction writer. Boom, I am in. Tell me more about this. So it's like, here's who you think I am, or here's who I seem to be on the surface, but here's who I really was. The twist. Also, it's revealing different sides of her right at the start here, right? Basketball superstar, captain of all these teams, well-versed, but then here's some other things I'm about to get into. A third way to do this is the philosophical question. Now, this one is hard to do, and it can sometimes blend in with the overly grand, ambiguous statement. That's the one that I mentioned at the top. So you got to be careful with this one. But here's an example. Does every life matter? Because it seems like certain lives matter more than others, especially when it comes to money. Now, I'm intrigued. And again, this one's hard to pull off. It took this author a lot of drafts, almost 10, to really get this, hone in on this. But it raises a philosophical question that has us going, well, what do I think about this? And so it's kind of working on two levels. Like, here's the student figuring out this question, how they explored it through their lives. But then also there's this larger thing that it engages the reader because they're wondering for themselves, well, how do I feel about this on this other level? So that can be cool. Another possibility is the confession opening. You start by admitting something that you might be judged for, like, I've been pooped on many times. I mean this in the most literal sense possible. I've been pooped on by pigeons and possums, house finches and hawks, egrets and eastern grays. Okay, tell me more. Now, why is this vulnerable? Because, the reader might be put off by discussions of poop early on in the essay. It also shows a great sense of humor. Fifth possibility for an opening is what's called the trailer thesis. And this is just a couple, 1 to 2 sentences that ground the essay and give us a sneak peek at what's to come, but without giving it away. So here's an example of that. 6 years ago, a scrawny 12-year-old kid took his first steps into Home Depot, the epitome of manliness. As he marched through the wood section, his eyes scrolled past the options. Red oak? No, too ubiquitous. Pine? No, too banal. Mahogany? Perfect. It would nicely complement his walls. As days went on, the final product was almost ready. 91-degree angles had been perfected to 90. Drawer slides had been lubricated 10 times over. Finally, the masterpiece was finished, and the little boy couldn't help but smile. A scrawny 12-year-old kid had become a scrawny 12-year-old man. This desk I sit at has not only seen me through the last 6 years, but its story and the story of the objects I keep on it provide a foundation for my future pursuits. Tell me more. So this is all kind of set up. But in this setup, he's revealing some cool details. He's meticulous, right? He also is smart. He uses some big words in here. You don't have to do this in your essay. He's also, handy. He works with his hands. Even as a kid, he was interested in this. But here's the trailer. So there's this desk and the objects on it that are going to basically be what he focuses on in the essay. So this is kind of the trailer. Give us a ... something to anticipate without, giving everything away. Okay, so those are 5 different possibilities that you can use for potentially up-leveling your opening, okay? Next, 2 ways to improve the flow of your personal statement. So let's say your personal statement is like, it's going pretty well, but you feel like, I feel like there are places where it's not quite getting there. So here's how you edit for flow. 2 exercises. So the first one is this. You can give it what I call the flow test. And what I mean by this is, if you look at this essay, you'll see that the first sentence of each paragraph is highlighted in bold. So without reading the whole essay, just look at these sentences. The clock was remarkably slow as I sat, legs tightly crossed, squirming at my desk. My diffidence, my shyness, was frustrating. Near meltdown, I knew something needed to be done. Disillusioned and wrung dry of ideas, I followed my mom's advice and joined a debate club. Notice how these kind of flow together. And you'll see that if you read the rest of this, you'll see that it basically flows together in a short version of the story. I call this providing like train tracks, like for the essay. And so a simple exercise that you can do is go through your essay, highlight the first sentence in bold and read it aloud to yourself. And if you feel like it's flowing, great. If it's not flowing, you can edit those sentences. And then obviously you need to go in and edit the paragraphs in order to make sure that it's flowing, that it's connecting. Because oftentimes, especially if the reader's skimming, they're going to be kind of looking at those first sentences. So making sure that those connect is great. Now, a quick caveat to this. This won't always work. It can sometimes be useful to also highlight the last sentence of each paragraph in bold, because sometimes that transition is going to be key. Sometimes this will lead you to separating your essay into different paragraphs. Sometimes students write a whole big chunk of text. And actually, if you can kind of split it into chapters or scenes, right, using this exercise, it'll kind of help us see the twists and turns of your narrative. So that's one exercise that I really like. Another one that you can do is creating a logic flow map. So the logic of your examples of your essay, whatever it is, could go chronologically, which means it could go in the order of things happened. But in some cases, it could be that you want to just teamwork or leadership. I develop my leadership skills further in the next paragraph, right? So you can use values to link your paragraphs. Now, it can help if you're going from details to leadership to teamwork to have an overarching theme that can kind of give us a sense of like how all of these things connect, so it doesn't feel quite as random. But know that there are different ways to transition between your examples. And obviously by segueing to a relevant example story or detail, that's going to be somewhat obvious, but it could be that you set up in one paragraph a particular concept, like, leadership or recognizing the needs of folks around you. And like you give an example of that in the next paragraph, and then another example of recognizing needs in the next paragraph. One cool thing you can do is you can actually create what's called an essay logic flow map, which is basically looking at the different values that you're showing, like what is the main quality you want them to get from each paragraph, or looking at the examples that you've got and basically putting them in different orders. So for example, let's say you want to show your curiosity, your meticulousness, which means like focus on details, and your dexterity, which is like being good with your hands. And maybe your examples flow like this, like you've got your asking questions, and then designing shoes is the way that you show your meticulousness, and taking apart phones shows your dexterity. Well, this logic flow could be, my curiosity as a kid and obsession with details led me to designing my own shoes and even taking phones apart. And that's the actual flow of this endodontics essay. And if you look at this, that follows this. But if you reorder the values or you reorder the examples, you can see that the logic flow would potentially change. So let's say you wanted to talk about designing shoes first, and then taking apart phones, and then asking questions. Well, what would that sound like? Well, maybe it's like, I started 2 small businesses. One was designing shoes. The other was phone repair, right? Though both failed, I learned to ask some great questions. So you're still getting that same content in the examples, and you're still getting some of these values in and insights, but the way that you're connecting in between those ideas is going to change. And you can play this back a few different ways. That's another thing. If you're feeling like it's really not working, one of the things you can do is just like reorder your examples, but you'll need to probably find what is the new logic flow. And if you can express that in a couple sentences, it can be really nice. So those are 2 exercises for improving the flow of your essay. 4 ways to know if your personal statement's doing its job. So what is the job of the personal statement? Well, I think the job of the personal statement is to demonstrate, I'm going to share my face for just a second, to demonstrate that you've got skills, qualities, values, and interests that you're going to be bringing with you to the college campus. And hopefully your personal statement demonstrates those skills, qualities, interests, and values. So that to me is the job of the personal statement. But the question is, once you've written one, how do you know if you've done a great job? So let me hop back into the tool. So there's something that I call the Great College Essay Test. This is in the refining section. And here's basically a PDF of the qualities that I believe are most important. I mentioned this one already, core values. I feel like by the end of a personal statement, we should be able to name 4 to 5 of the author's core values. And are they varied? Not just like hard work, determination, and perseverance, but do we get, oh, we see your autonomy and your resourcefulness, and oh, healthy boundaries are important to you, and also diversity is important. So do we get a nice range of values that we could point to? Imagine that your reader needs to argue for you in a committee of, of a bunch of folks and say, here's why I think we should accept this person. Give them some ammo, give them lots of values. I'm committed to this and this and this, so that they can argue for you, because you never know, your application might end up in a committee and you might need someone to argue for you. So I believe giving your core values, describing those, giving examples of those is a great way to equip your reader with information about yourself, information that's going to help them determine if you are going to make a great contribution to their campus. Vulnerability is another quality that I love to see, and I often see in essays that I love. Doesn't 100% have to be there, but is your essay, your personal statement, actually personal? Or is it more of just sort of like a best of your extracurricular activities? Is it like, I achieved this, and I achieved that, and I achieved this other thing? I want to know not just who you are, I'm pointing up here, but like who you are, I'm pointing to your heart and your gut, like what really matters to you. And there's so many ways to be vulnerable, whether it's sharing something that you really care about a lot, or revealing some weird fact about yourself, like you've been pooped on many times, and then explaining why that is and how that connects to your work in the veterinarians, at the vet's office, and more largely speaking, your work with environmentalism, with the environment, as that essay ended up going. So what moments? What are these moments that you answer the question, so what? You provide insights that surprise us. I call these important and interesting connections. Are these moments kind of predictable? Like, everything I do makes me stronger? Or are there ways that you connect to things that actually peak, that actually jump? This to me is the place where a lot of students kind of, they go kind of halfway, but they don't really push to develop insights that actually jump off the page. And then finally, craft. Craft is just revising, refining to make sure that you're doing all these things that I'm talking about here, but making sure that it flows logically with the flow exercises that I just mentioned. Making sure that you can really speak for why this paragraph is here, why this sentence is here, why did you choose this word? Did you use the word passion 6 times, when you could have used it 1 or maybe even 0 times? Passion is just one of those really common words. Passion, plethora, myriad, these are the sort of college essay go-to words. Interdisciplinary is another big one. So anyway, these are the 4 qualities to me of a great personal statement. And yeah, I think that's all I want to say about that for now. All right, what's next on our agenda? I'm going to share a different screen with you. All right, I put together a nice little Prezi for you. Prezi. That's kind of a fun word to say. Prezi. All right, so back to the Prezi I was sharing earlier. So, on our path to having a final application that looks awesome and beautiful, we got to figure out these different pieces. So we talked a little about the main personal statement. Let's talk about some of the supplemental essays that you're going to need to write. Now, what is a supplemental essay? So if you're applying via the Common App, you'll have this main personal statement that's 650 words or less. If you're applying via the Coalition app, it's a little bit shorter. Different schools have different lengths. The University of California schools don't have the main personal statement. MIT does not have the main personal statement. So you'll need to look at those schools for that advice, or just Google it plus college essay guy, and there's probably a guide for it. But in terms of your supplemental essays, these are those additional essays that some schools require. Not all, but some. How do you find out? You can either go to the school's website. Usually, though, you'll find it on the Common App. If the school isn't on the Common App, go to the school's website. So one of the things that I think you can do that'll really help, and I can't emphasize this enough, and this is coming from somebody who was not super organized in high school, but who learned to be more organized, is to organize all your prompts and deadlines on a simple essay tracker spreadsheet. It's going to take you less than 30 minutes, but it's going to help you get your whole world organized. Now, some of you, I'm already preaching to the choir, and you're like on this webinar and you're like, oh my gosh, I've already done it. Mine's color coded. And other of you are listening to me and you're being like, yeah, right. There's no way I'm going to do that. For those of you who are saying no way, I want you to consider this, because here's what one can look like. Once you've got all your prompts there, you can start to see which prompts can potentially overlap. So for example, this student was writing for the University of California schools about a favorite academic subject. He was writing about math, in particularly calculus. when it came to, and this is a couple years ago, so these prompts aren't for right now. When it came to writing his Pomona one, it asked, tell us about a subject you couldn't stop exploring. And he was like, oh, I can reuse my math essay. Now, could he have figured that on his own? Yes, probably, but this is going to help give you like a dashboard. He was also able to see that, oh yeah, here's my YS essay that I'm going to write for Claremont McKenna. I'm going to write another one for Harvey Mudd. I'm going to double that with, or triple that with USC. I can probably reuse some of that content, something that I'll talk about on the course. But if essentially with this, he was, able to sort of organize and see, oh yeah, I can use my construction. So what he ended up looking at was like, okay, I don't need to write like 30 essays. I really need to write yellow. So one, there's my blue essay, there's purple. So really there are like 5 to 8 main essays that he was working on and kind of reusing, which can save you some stress. Now, hopefully that doesn't mean that you're just going to spend less time on these. Maybe that means that. I mean, in some sense, yes, that's a good thing. But I don't want you to do this and be like, oh, I'm good to go. I just have to write 3 essays, because it still means that you're going to need to work hard on those essays. Which leads me to my next tip, which is writing the super essay, which is basically combining your college essay prompts and writing essays that will work for multiple prompts. One student that I worked with did an essay that worked for 12 different prompts. He was super, and there's this quote, I don't know who said it, but that humans are inherently lazy. Maybe that's just like kind of accepted wisdom, or we look for efficiencies, to put it in a positive way. But that was a student who was like really proud of being able to do that. And why is this useful? Well, let's say you've got an essay from, Michigan, for example. Describe a community you belong to and your place within it. And then you've got Duke's essay, share a perspective you bring or experiences you've had to help us understand you better. And then you've got Stanford's, tell us about something that's meaningful to you and why. Well, let's say you're combing through your activities list and you're like, what side of me have I not shown yet? Well, I talked about the X in my personal statement, but I haven't really talked about theater in, too much. So could it be that theater is a community that you belong to and your place within it? And could you also describe, as you're describing that community, a perspective you bring that theater has helped shape in you that, oh, by the way, is also meaningful to you? See what I'm doing here? Because then when Stanford gets that meaningful to you essay, it's not just about theater, how it's meaningful to you, but it's also about how it's a community and how it's developed a particular perspective. So getting more specific and answering these 3 questions, because by the way, these happen to be really similar in length. In fact, they might be the exact same length. Michigan, I think, actually changed theirs and expanded just a little bit, but these are kind of in the 250 to 300 word range. So getting smart, stitching time saves 9, and planning ahead of time. Je recommende. I don't know what the French word for recommend is. Okay, other supplemental essays. The Why Us essay. Now, this is the one that's most common, right? That you're probably familiar with. You're probably already working on one, but it's like, how do you make sure that the school knows that you've done your research and that you're a great fit? And I wouldn't recommend writing about their location, weather, ranking, or mascot. Now, the exception, if there's something particular about the school's location. So let's say you're applying to Columbia and there's something in NYC that's like perfect for you, that's okay, I think. What I'm talking about is generally saying like, can't wait to go to USC because LA seems awesome. What in particular, based on your interests, do you want to connect with in LA? So get really specific with that, okay? But other things like weather, definitely don't talk about ranking. Students do that, and I just wouldn't recommend it. Here's a really simple outline for a YS essay. This one is maybe worth screenshotting. But if you start with an intro and a thesis, which basically explains why you want to study and why, I think it's a good, solid way to start one of these. And then as you get into your content, what's a really specific academic offering? Hopefully that's particular to the school if possible, and it's in your intended major, concentration. Okay, how does it connect back to you? The key to these YS essays is go to the school, connect it back to you. You, school, school, you, back and forth, back and forth. Then I think it's good to follow up, no matter, depending on how long, will depend on how much room you have for this. Can you find another really specific academic offering that's also in your intended major, if you know what that is? If there's something academic that's not in your intended major because, hey, you're more than just, interested in engineering or, theater or, law or whatever, pre-law, whatever it is, political science, then what else are you in? What other kind of academics are you interested in? And then are there any extracurriculars? And I offer this order because sometimes students will talk about study abroad, like first thing, they'll be like, I can't wait to study abroad at such and such. And it's like, that's kind of like going over to someone's house and being like, I'm so excited to be here. Let's leave. I'm ready to leave. What is it on campus that you want to engage with? So if you can get into some academics, major related, and then some other things, then get into like a major extracurricular activity that again connects back to you. And if you want to bring in some miscellaneous extracurriculars, I'm also interested in this and this, and demonstrate social fit, that's great. The closing to me isn't super important for these. You just need to wrap it up in some way. So that's my crash course on the crash course of the YS. If you're writing about an extracurricular activity, here are some great questions to answer. What did you do? What literally did you do? What responsibilities did you have? You can do, use active verbs for this to explain. What problems did you solve? This is another way of thinking about what you did, but can sometimes help shape your essay. You could potentially start with a problem that you solved. What did you learn through the experience? That one's going to be kind of obvious, but looking at the values that you developed is going to be great somewhere, probably after the halfway point. What impact did you have? If you can support that with numbers, that's great, especially for the University of California personal insight questions. Maybe you had a club that wasn't very gender balanced, and now the club is 50-50 gender balanced. Cool, you raised membership or you raised funds, whatever that is. Give us some evidence that you had an impact. And then I love when students connect it beyond just the activity itself to other parts of themselves. So through X particular activity, I learned A, B, and C. Qualities that served me well when I was doing this other thing, Y thing. So if you can think about how did that shape you and change you? And then how did that manifest itself in your life? Then it becomes less about volleyball or, this fundraising event that we had, and more about how you changed and developed and were able to bring those qualities and skills, because that's what they're going to be, interested in, not just what was the achievement or, the particular event, if you're talking about sort of like a sport, but it's like, how did it work on you? How did it change you? Quick tip, if you're writing a 150-word extracurricular essay, tell instead of show. You don't need to get all fancy with the opening, just boom, just get right into it with the facts. Value information over poetry. All right. A quick framework. So for me, the difference between a boring supplemental essay and a more interesting one is a boring one is going to choose a common topic, make common connections, and use common language. Whereas a more interesting one is going to choose an uncommon topic, if possible, make uncommon connections, which is almost always possible, and use uncommon language. For me, the most important part here is these uncommon connections, because even if you choose a common topic, like let's say volleyball, I wouldn't recommend making common connections, which is to say, it's taught me discipline, hard work, and perseverance. Like, what has it taught you besides these things? What are some of the uncommon things? What has it taught you about, real teamwork, right? Maybe there's an insight about not just, teamwork is sort of like working together, but there's like some insight that you got specifically about teamwork. Or what did it teach you about, autonomy? Or what did it teach you about, I'm trying to think of other examples, the environment or democracy. Those seem like kind of random things, but I've seen students connect to some pretty interesting different values. All right, I'm going to go through these quickly and lightly, and then we're going to shift to Q&A very shortly. That was 3 adverbs, wow. If you're writing about a community that you're a part of, do a quick brainstorm of all the communities you're part of, as many as you can think of, because you might surprise yourself with a community that isn't immediately obvious to you, okay? This is often connected to different identities that we have. And then if you're writing a Y major essay, if you don't know what you want to study, and oftentimes students ask me on these webinars, like, what do I do? Pick 2, at the most 3. I wouldn't pick more than 3 things for your Y major, because it's going to seem like it's all over the place. Pick 2 or 3 things that you're interested in. You don't have to fully, in most cases, you don't have to fully commit and stay in that. Now, I'm going to say something different in just a second. What I mean by this is many schools that you apply to, if you're applying to like the College of Arts and Sciences at Northwestern, if you pick psychology, you can switch over to something else, in many cases. Now, that's not always true at a school like Northwestern. If you pick journalism, it's harder to switch into journalism. It's sometimes, depending on the school you apply to, harder to switch out. So make sure when you're applying to whatever school you're applying to, if you're not sure about your major, that if you pick something as a placeholder to be like, I'm kind of interested in this now, and here's why, here are the experiences that led me to be interested in that. Make sure that you are able to switch. Okay, in many cases you will be. Do I want to get into this? I don't really. The short version is like when you create your own class essay, if you're working on this and it's very small, many students don't, you can include not just a short description, but you can basically write a sample syllabus which offers required reading, and even a hypothetical weekly meeting time and room number. And that can be kind of fun to include in those. But there aren't many schools that require that one. A great Stanford roommate essay should reveal important skills, qualities, and values. And speaking of Stanford, I'm going to switch over to a great application. I'm going to spend like 5 minutes on the application because, well, I'm going to spend like 8 minutes on the application because it is a really good one. And I don't think I've walked through it live on any session before. So let me share my screen. And here goes. So here's his personal statement. This is a student who was accepted at Stanford last year. Really awesome guy. Here's his personal statement. I'll let you get to know him through this personal statement. Since 1941, he says, my family's had an odd tradition. 3 days a week, my great-grandfather Pop brought home ribs. By the way, the reason I'm sharing this whole application is I want to illustrate some of these concepts that I'm talking about. And you can actually look for them if you want. Do you see values, insights, vulnerability? Is there craft? Is it well crafted? Okay. So just to name them again, values, insight, craft, and vulnerability. 3 days a week, my great-grandfather brought home ribs. You see the value, family? After dinner, he'd go around the table inspecting each plate, making sure each rib was stripped down to the bone. If you found one morsel, you couldn't be excused. Pop believed that before you could leave the table, you had to finish your ribs. This lesson has stuck with me. Whether I'm staying up until 2 in the morning to figure out the radius of convergence of a power series, geeky language, I love it, or identifying solutions to countless concerns issued by my school district, I strive to finish my ribs. But this is just one of the many lessons that food has taught me. Great, so now we've established a theme. Here's an essay about food lessons. And the first one is finish your ribs. And he not only talks about it in relation to his family, which is where the idea came from, but he connects it to other sides of himself. He smuggles in, I like to say, smuggles in different sides of himself here. But what other lessons has food taught you? During Thanksgiving, instead of going around the table to express thanks, my family writes notes on the tablecloth, the same one for the past 26 years. You'll find thoughts from my dad, but only until 2004. Or corny jokes from my stepdad, but only until 2016. And you'll read family is everything from my great-grandmother Non, but only until 2017. A little vulnerability in there. My family's far from perfect, but it's in the presence of a tablecloth where time freezes and I begin to feel an unfamiliar sense of stability. More vulnerability. It's where my brother Noah told my dad he loved him after 6 years of not communicating. Where mom sat next to dad without a lawyer by their side, and where my family's gathered for every birthday at the same restaurant since I was 4. To me, eating means celebrating culture, people, life. And I celebrated Non's life by trying a dish I've feared since my first Passover, gefilte fish, a stuffed seafood concoction. It's not the taste I remember clearly, but rather how it began a cascade of tasting other Jewish foods, chopped liver, beef tongue, pickled herring. In the time since, I've realized gefilte fish is more than just the unfamiliar food tucked away in my great-grandma's fridge. It represents, notice the transition, the opportunities that arise from trying new things. Like what? Because gefilte fish is everywhere, he says. In some cases, gefilte fish has meant testing different locations of bins to minimize food waste in a school with no cafeteria. Or researching how biofortification can create an allosteric inhibitor, reducing the release of ethylene, thus increasing the shelf life of produce. Again, I call that geeky language. The lessons I learned through food aren't just limited to traditional meals, though. For the past 5 years, I've sold Otter Pops, a type of popsicle at Spokane's annual race. Every year, my business grows. I hire new employees to manage new stands throughout the course to sell thousands of pops. But while my popsicle empire expands, one thing remains true. I take a break amid the chaos to eat my own Otter Pops. Now, each of these is an insight. So, we're getting values. He's entrepreneurial, right? But the insight here is that he takes a moment, and this is another value, to eat his own Otter Pops. In other words, to rest, relax. It's the same reason I play volleyball with friends after a long week of school and swim in the river with my football teammates after we finish conditioning. So he works in the sports sides of himself, but he's also talking about this value. I take tremendous pride in these things. In fact, I find them necessary. In other words, I'm not just going to work hard. I also know that I need to take breaks to enjoy the fruits of my labor, or the Otter Pops of my labor. And when I cook, I transform a part of raw earth into raw culture. This is the big so what at the end. Preparing steak enables me to remember my great-grandfather, while eating it reminds me of its destruction of the environment. This is how I understand the world. I cook to discover myself. Insight, boom. I eat to learn about the world around me. But We become a product of the industrial food system. This is what I call an up-level moment, leading us to believe food is just another commodity and rendering us unable to identify that it exists at the seed of our very identity. This is why I want to study anthropology and public policy. What insight? To restore the bond between humans, food, and culture, and to create the policies that will ensure those who are food insecure have the same opportunity to do so themselves. I have so much left to eat in this world, so much to change, so much to create, and even more to impact. I'm hungry. Really lovely piece. So I've mentioned some of the values in here, but they're pretty clear, I think. Family, there's also, you could argue that's hard work, entrepreneurialism. There's intellectual vitality, curiosity, lots of insights along the way. It's beautifully crafted. It's just, really well written. And there's vulnerability in there, talking about some of the family stuff. This is a guy who's like, I don't know that I want to write the typical divorce essay, but it is a part of me because he was the product of, I think, 3 or 4 divorces because step parents ended up getting divorced. And even that's brought in and, how food is connected to that. So I'm going to look at a couple of these these supplemental essays, just so you can see how he was kind of piecing the application together. This one, what's meaningful to you and why? He writes about his experience as a football player, but not your typical football essay. Listen to this. Growing up a football player, afraid of contact, I've heard the phrase, be a man, more times than I've heard my dad say, I love you. When he told me that, I was just like, it just destroyed me. And that's no coincidence. Society taught us to be that way. Oh my God, I'm crying already remembering this essay. This is, yeah. And what I love about this is that he's bringing in empathy. So he's not blaming his dad. He's saying that this is what society taught him. So that's this huge dose of empathy. Trapped underneath my sweaty pads, I'm coached to be strong when I'm weak, tough when I'm in pain, cocky when I'm insecure. But that's not me. This is the twist, right? The twist opening. I'm a boy who collects stuffed polar bears, vulnerability, and cuddles with them when I'm feeling down. I'd rather wander through a grocery store than spend time perusing a Home Depot. And by no means am I a handyman. I'm a softie who happens to throw a tight spiral. That's a well-crafted sentence. But sometime during my 13 seasons of football, I realized that living in the weight room, hitting harder than your opponent, or leading a game-winning drive is not what makes you a good man. Whew, I'm going to cry again. Rather, it's being human enough to stand up for those who can't walk, speak for those who don't have a voice, and admit the damages of a lifestyle that has enveloped you since you could walk. As I battle for the starting quarterback position this year, by the way, I'm that good. It's my turn to redefine the term that tried to define me. Oh my God. So that when the next generation of football players gets told to be a man, it means to use your heart, not just your helmet. Because to me, changing the narrative of how boys view masculinity matters. Whew, I didn't expect to get so choked up reading this, but I imagine this is landing. Y'all feeling this? And what I love about this essay is that he mentions a specific thing that's meaningful to him. There are other things that we could pick from, but he specifically mentions this is the thing, changing the narrative, having an impact on future generations. The roommate essay. So now we've got something different. So we've got the food side and what that connects to. And now we've got his identity as a jock, but also here's the kind of football player that I am. Next essay. Hi, roommate. This is the roommate essay that I mentioned. Looking for values. We have values and insights. Hi, roommate. I've perfected the scrambled egg. My secret, the lowest heat possible and a touch of cream cheese. I found that the better things in life, like scrambled eggs, take time. Eggs also act as a great resolver of conflicts. I've delivered countless plates to my brothers after many squabbles, and it has yet to fail me. Now, that overlaps a little bit with the personal statement, but I'm okay with it. He hasn't talked about his brothers much yet. I hope we make scrambled eggs together rather than give them to one another apologetically, though. So he shows his sense of humor, too, here, which is great. By the way, someone said in a Facebook forum that I'm a part of that, remember that humor is not a protein, it's a spice. Okay? I'm going to say that while I'm taking off my sweatshirt. Humor is a protein, is a spice, not a protein. In other words, don't just make like this is my funny essay. We got to get those values and insights. What are some values? While I don't ever expect there to be an elephant in our room, there'll always be a polar bear. Well, 15 of them. If you ever need someone to talk to when I'm not around, feel free to take one. My bears are your bears. So it's that sharing, connecting with others. That's the value here. It repeats the polar bears thing, but that was really important to him. Oh, and as the youngest, I'm used to being teased. So feel free to poke fun. It won't get to me. Probably. Again, his sense of humor, but also his willingness to be able to, take jokes. My grandpa and I have a 2-person book club. Now that you're my roommate, I hope you'll join. Whether we're pondering how the concept of human rights is just a bizarre inner subjective, or realizing how much corn we eat, Books will keep you and I connected. Again, just a little bit to sort of ping. He's super smart, even though this has kind of an informal tone. Finally, have you ever tried to master animal impressions because life is too short to not know exactly what a cow sounds like? Dyed your hair orange, shaved tiger stripes in your head, and got a spray tan just for one school basketball game? If so, I'd love to hear about it. If not, even better, we have more to discuss. Josh. All right. Here are the short answers that, again, reveal different sides of him. Most significant challenge our society faces today: society lives off Band-Aids. We're entering a neo-Gilded Age where we often put temporary solutions on ongoing problems to make temporary progress. It's time we become aware of when it's better to repair damage with stopgap answers or tackle issues at their core with more long-term solutions. I really like it when a student names the significant challenge right at the start. It's tricky because you got to get specific enough that it's not going to be something that someone else says, but it has to be big enough that it's significant, right? That we could argue that it's a truly significant challenge. So it's a tough balance with these Stanford short answers. In terms of how you spent your last 2 summers, a list here is fine. You don't need to use complete sentences. Historical moment do you wish you could have witnessed? He talks about this moment with FDR, family gathering around the radio. Together we cannot fail, and I believe him. So it shows his little historical interests. The 5 words that best describe you. When I looked at this, he was still kind of trying to figure out what these were, but once threw a pizza party for myself, extrovert and introvert, and someone who ensures there's an extra seat at the table, both kind of food related, which I don't remember which one he ended up choosing. When the choice is yours, what do you read, listen to, or watch? Listening to grandpa. He loves hearing, the grandpa, the 2-person book club, but his grandpa also recited things. So he mentions that here. So again, family. What do you want to experience at Stanford? This is like a one item, why us? Stanford's food initiatives. Look at the specifics here. Launching, David Lobel and Marshall Burke and the FCE to redesigning the food system in the Feed Collaborative. Really specific, nice. And Matt, this is no longer a Stanford prompt. These are for last year, so don't write these. Don't write all of them. An extra hour in the day, what would you do? In first grade, I got rejected from my school's talent show with my rendition of Imagine by John Lennon. With an extra hour, I'd learn how to properly sing so that before I leave for college, I could go back to my elementary school and prove all the naysayers wrong. So again, just bring in his sense of humor. And then the last one, I'm not going to read this one because I want to leave time for Q&A, but he talks about an experience that makes him genuinely excited about learning. And this was an extracurricular activity project that he took on. He talks about, biofortification as being nature's CRISPR, and, why he wants to, why that's so meaningful to him. He wants to be a leader in this particular movement. Sorry, this wasn't the extracurricular activity one. This was the extracurricular one, which was his work with a food pantry. You can tell, heavily food themed, but just a beautiful piece. Underneath this, the activities list was well put together. He used his additional information section really well to include more details about his nonprofit work. But anyway, that's the long and short of that. All right, here's the 90-second PSA for my upcoming course that starts this weekend. Hope to have some of y'all join me. It's pay what you can, which means there's no financial barrier to entry. So I hope that some of y'all will join me. It's going to be a lot of fun. It'll be like this, but we'll be working on your applications instead. So it starts on Saturday, how to write a personal statement. You're going to get access to the tool that I just walked you through. We'll have live sessions. So the sooner you sign up, the sooner you can kind of dive into the sessions because there's a little bit of work to do. And then we'll talk about picking topics. How do you find a great topic? We'll play this game on Saturday called, is this a good topic or not? And students, you will submit your topics. Like, what do you think of this as a topic? And I'll be like, oh, that sounds cool. Or maybe consider this instead. I'll give you, things to consider. And I'm also, importantly, going to give you ways to come up with new topics if you do want to end up choosing a different topic. Then I'll have you, through the tool, write a new draft. The following Saturday, we'll talk about how do you write that draft and revise it. Some of you will be still at the place of trying to find a great topic. Some of you will be revising already. Then we'll talk about up-leveling. And then the last session is just going to be basically me reviewing. And all of these sessions, I'm going to be reviewing these, reviewing essays live. The other part 2 of this course, which happens later in the afternoon, is the supplements. So beyond the personal statement, we've got to talk about all the other parts of the application, right? Which is like the activities list, the additional info, the why us, which I just touched on just briefly today, the extracurricular essay, specific supplements, and basically whatever supplements you're working on, you can bring into the session. We'll look at them live. I'll be reviewing lots of essays and talking about here's what I like about this one. Here's what I think this can use some work. Again, did I mention it's pay what you can? So I hope to have some of y'all join me on Saturday. All right, let's look at some questions. We got 10 minutes. That's pretty good. All right, I'm going to jam through some of these. So I'm going to actually share my screen because sometimes folks find it useful if they can see Ba-dum-bum-bum. All right. So here are the questions. Here we go. So I'm not going to share that example app. No, sorry to the folks who were just asking. All right. But on the course, I'm going to share with you a ton of examples, like pretty much for all the schools. So, and again, did I mention pay what you can? All right, I won't say that again. All right. Is it okay if I write like 3 lines for the opening? Yes. Any advice for someone struggling to make their essay more specific? It's hard to answer that one in like a minute. How do I answer that quickly? I guess I don't know what you mean by more specific, because it would depend on what you're trying to make more specific. So I can't, it's hard for me to answer that. Maybe you could ask a more specific question and I'd be able to. Can I utilize these methods in the PIQs? Some of them. The PIQ advice that I would give is different. And I've got a whole separate course that I spent weeks on that the PIQs need to correspond to the 14 points of comprehensive review. So by the way, the PIQs are the personal insight questions for the University of California schools. There are 14 things that they're looking for, and they're going to be much more straightforward. I wouldn't use the opening advice for that, like how to write a great opening. I think it's a little bit different. You want to be more straightforward with those, basically. But there's a whole course. It's also pay what you can that you can get access to in 2 minutes. It's on the website. Ashley, will you throw in the link to the UC PIQ one into the chat box, please? And also, folks were asking, how do you sign up for the course? Would you mind actually just throwing in the link to how to sign up for the course? I would appreciate that. Thanks. Okay, is it okay to start our essay with a quote if it's something we said? Sure. In my essay, could I explore a passion that's not my major? For example, I like writing in my free time, but don't want to be a writer. Yeah, of course. Daria asks, isn't it too much words just for an opening? We don't have much of that. It depends on the essay. If it's 650 words, you've got room for an opening. If it's 100 words, maybe not. Is starting off with, I learned my lesson. Good. It sounds like an intriguing opening. I'm kind of into it, yeah. How can I incorporate my adversity in life? Because a lot happened in the past. So there's an exercise for this that it's called the feelings and needs exercise. So, when it comes to this here, let me just show you what this is. In the tool, I hope you'll join the course. I'm still going to give you an exercise either way, but there's something called the feelings and needs exercise. And in the feelings and needs exercise, it's a really good one for basically, actually this one here, you can just Google feelings and needs college essay guy. Let me just give you this link. I'll put it in the chat box. This is a great one if you've experienced a lot of challenges for processing, how do I write about those challenges in my essay? So I'm just going to throw that in the chat box for you. That's my short answer to that. How do I improve my essays? Reflection or conclusion? Ooh, I've got a whole module on this, Julianne, but I don't know if I can answer it right now. Here's my short answer, Julianne. What I'm interested in is, what values did you gain through the experience? Let's just go with this. What values did you gain? And hopefully the values are not obvious. In other words, my experience has made me who I am, and everything, or like leadership is essential, or teamwork is essential for success. Make sure that it's not a cliche, but could you find some uncommon values to connect things to? That's my short answer. Tommy, can I start with, there's nothing as peaceful as listening to a symphony play a sensational piece, but when a couple of instruments lose their tuning, it soon turns into a disaster. Maybe. I'd have to see the rest of the essay. Maria, is it good to come back and forth in the chronological time of the story? That can be cool. Yeah, breaking up the thing so it's not just chronological. That can be really interesting. Veronica, is it bad to talk about a non-personality, non-academic part of you? I'm writing about how my grandmother's life has taught me how to love others. I would recommend not writing about someone else as your primary topic, Veronica. I would recommend finding a topic that's more about you. Because if you're writing about someone else, oftentimes a lot of the word budget ends up being eaten up with, look how amazing this person is. And the reader at the end is like, wow, your grandmother seems amazing. But she's totally into our school, but we want to know about you. So I wouldn't recommend writing about somebody else. Now, if you wanted to weave in a couple lessons like that student did for the Stanford essay, the application, that could be cool, but it's got to be 90% about you, 10% about grandma. If I wanted to end in action, do I put my reflection before the action paragraph? Yeah, sounds like it. That sounds like a good idea. Is it possible if I write about cheerleading but then transition into fashion? Potentially, yeah. It's hard to know without seeing more, but Generally, could that work? Sure. Does reflection need to be shown instead of told? No, I think that actually, JJ, reflection is the time to tell. So what is JJ talking about? Your English teacher says, show, don't tell. Give us some examples, details, to give us lots of specifics so we can kind of see the lesson. But then I think that insight, that reflection is actually the part where it's the tell. So I say not show, don't tell. I say show first and then tell. So I think it's okay if your reflection is the tell part. I'm having a hard time writing about myself and picking an idea. Like, I've used all your brainstorming tools. Any other advice? Finley, have you used all the tools in the Choose Your Own Adventure tool? Because if you haven't, those are the ones that I would recommend. So in terms of finding a topic, you can let me know in the chat box, Finley, if you've already worked through this. But the brainstorming exercises are how to get started, but then you're going to want to pick a path. And there are, in this tool, 7 different paths for Montage, and there's an 8th one for the narrative structure one. So I don't have time to go through all of these right now, but here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different paths you could potentially use that would help you find a topic. And yeah, because I don't have time to go through them, I'll just say that they're here. And I would say try these, because if you haven't tried these, you haven't tried everything yet. What if 273 words of my 645 word essay is setting up the reasons and context for my current actions? How is this for the beginning of the essay? So I don't know, because I'd have to see what it is, Mira. So the beginning, in a third of my existence that I spent knitting and sewing, my 9-year-old eyes had never seen magenta flowers embroidered on a yellow cloth umbrella. Hundreds of colorful, handcrafted knickknacks enticed me. But this umbrella enchanted me. It wouldn't escape my mind. Can I please have it pretty, please? Okay, I don't know. It's hard for me to say, Mira, how this works for the beginning of an essay, because I would need to see the whole essay to know where you're going and what your topic is. Because if the topic is not super strong, then, so I don't know. I'd have to know. I'd have to see the rest of the essay. What sort of things can put an essay over the top? I think you mean in the good way, like not what makes it over the top, like too far, but like what makes it really stand out. And the answer to that, Ada, are core values, insights, vulnerability, and craft. Any suggestions for shortening the word count of an essay without cutting out important details? Yeah, use that this flow exercise that I suggested, Lily, where you kind of highlight the first sentence of each paragraph in bold, because that's going to help you determine what the main idea for each paragraph is. Once you've got that, you'll be like, oh, I could probably trim some of this. So it'll help you just clarify the connection between your ideas. How can you make an essay more powerful? Too hard for me to answer in 2 minutes, so I'm going to skip that one. How should we write the last paragraph? I kind of answered that already, so I'm going to skip that one. What's really difficult is the fact that we really don't know ourselves. Do you have any advice for us to overcome this anxiety? Yeah, those exercises, some of the ones that I suggested, and you'll find some more. Let's see, Google college essay guy brainstorming exercise, and there should be some good ones there for like self-exploration. I recommend. I'm just going to kind of skim through some of these because we've got just 2 minutes. How would you adjust the outline for the Y essay? Oh, this is a good one. This is specific. I'm going to try to answer ones that I can get quickly. How do you adjust the outline for the YS essay if there's a 100-word limit? Liana, go with 2 or 3 things and just focus specifically on those. Okay? So it's like, this is the main thing that I'm interested in, and I'm also interested in this. And if you've got room, a 3rd thing. But just go 2 or 3 specific things that hopefully set that school apart from all the other schools you're applying to. Ask yourself, is this something that they would have at a school besides Dartmouth, right? If it's a 100-word one, or whichever school, it's maybe Dartmouth. I think Yale's a little bit longer now, but just go with 2 or 3 things, or maybe MIT you're writing for. The personal statement and the common app personal essay, Madison, those are the same thing in my mind. So I'm not sure what you mean by that. I answered this one. How to connect a why us essay back to you. So Ada, you don't just want to say like, Northwestern has theater, because then it's just like, well, we know Northwestern has theater. Northwestern knows it. It's like, I am somebody who is interested in producing my own work. And I love that Northwestern has a theater group that particularly works with new artists. So then it's connecting back to you, right? So it's not just, hey, Northwestern's got this cool theater company, but how does it connect to your interests, desires, skills, qualities, etc. Let's see. If school doesn't have a Y major essay, is it okay if we don't talk about our intended major at all? Yeah, that's okay. Let's see. It depends on the prompt. If there's no word limit, what word count or range do you recommend? It depends on the prompt. If y'all get, well, on the course next week, get really specific with your questions and I can answer them more quickly. But let me answer one more. Do we have a bunch more? Oh gosh, we do. Never mind. How do we actually start off the essay? Totally answered that. Okay, I'm going to answer these three quickly. Is baking an okay topic to write about? Yes. It's a little bit common, so make sure that you can kind of brainstorm what's the common baking essay going to focus on, and then don't write about those things. Okay, and how do you do that? You got to kind of make it up, use your imagination to imagine, what would folks talk about. But if you Google food college essay guy, you'll probably see one or two food essay examples. How can we best use the additional information section? Jayshree, I've got a whole guide on that. If you Google additional info college essay guy, you'll see a whole guide on the additional information section. Is chess a common topic? A little bit less common than baking, Milton, but it's somewhat common. It's every year there's a student that I work with who writes a chess essay, and the key there is going to be making sure that it connects to different values, different sides of you. And there are lots of ways to do that. But if it's something that you know and love, and it's it's probably a main extracurricular activity, make sure that you've still got something left to use for your other extracurricular activity prompts. But I think chess could be a cool topic, especially if you got a lot to say about it. All right, thanks for hanging with me. Much love to you all. And I hope to see some of y'all on the course. I hope you'll join me. And if not, best of luck. And be well. Bye.